Hello and welcome to the Project Create webinar series. We do apologise, but some of the audio in today's recording can get a little bit sketchy, but hopefully you'll stay with us for today's episode of what does the co in co-production really mean. Over to Paul.
Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming to the latest webinar of the Create project. It's an interesting one, this one, because basically I think it's sort of like this is a discussion that really lots of us started the journey of this project with, thinking about issues around co-production, which is of course been a key issue in this kind of research, at least since Sherry Arnstein's participation ladder of citizen participation, published in 1969. So it's a long-running debate, and lots of people here have been kind of very engaged in that debate in its various permutations. You know, I'm thinking of those kind of debates of the 90s where there's a big discussion about what does participation mean? Is participation the same as co-option? What's happening to that kind of activist tradition that was big in the 1980s, or going right back to all the stuff around rapid rural appraisal, where there was a real kind of like, sort of like activist agenda in lots of this stuff, and it kind of like has become sort of part of the norm, as it were, leading to big discussions about, is it just tokenistic? What are we actually trying to do with participation in co-production now? And so this is a discussion that that's been actively taking place over the whole lifetime, really, of Create, over the last 3 years. So for those people that are new to these webinars, Create is a 3-year project funded by UKRI under the auspices of the Adolescent Mental Health and Developing Mind call. There were a whole bunch of projects funded by this call. Some of them are kind of big programmatic projects, and then some are slightly smaller kind of methodological projects. And ours is one of the methodological projects, thinking about how arts-based practices in particular can be more effectively utilised within mental health research. So you'll see on the screen some of the people that have been involved in this. I won't go through the list of all the names, but it's been a massively collaborative project. It's been quite fraught in the sense that we try to take the interdisciplinarity of this project really, really seriously. So really trying to kind of like get to the nub of the different ways in which we all approach this stuff. So it's been. I think we've no one's fallen out, but I think there's been a lot of robust discussion. So it's been a wonderful journey to be on. And it is my great pleasure to introduce today's speakers. So my name is Paul Cook. I'm just chairing this thing. And I always like these slides because Danielle picks pictures with me holding a camera, which makes me feel like a filmmaker, which I always like. And it's my great pleasure to introduce everybody else. Sylvan, who's going to be talking a bit more about co-production. Chrissy will also be talking about her view on co-production. And then we have 3 members of our fantastic youth board, Ananya, Frida and Shreya, who are also going to be talking about their perspective on what co-production has meant to them as part of the Create project. And we're also going to be showing a short film, because we always like to show a short film in these kinds of situations. So please, Sylvan, take it away.
Very much, Paul. It's quite momentous to think that this is sort of all of the collaborations and conversations that have been really, really fruitful and dynamic around the opportunity that the Create project has initiated. I think sort of first point would be to say an idea of wanting to bring the different agents, participants, facilitators, researchers who are often aligned around a piece of research together with aspiration to get work in the most equitable way possible is truly wonderful. And even though there is a long legacy of this kind of work, it is still quite surprising on one level to ponder on why it just isn't the norm. Why doesn't this happen all the time? So I think it's important to say that first, because when I then have some questions or challenges about what I think about it, it's to be held within that frame of mind, really. What happens if we want to try and work together? what happens if we want to try and use the maximum capacity of all of the people involved in the process? And that aspiration, on the whole, leads to something really positive, something really beneficial. However, desire to have that aspiration may also be the reason why question keeps coming back to surface of conversation around research and project work. And I think one of a number of issues to think about then is in an environment where there is often a desire to sort of categorize and standardize activity, there could also be some consideration those who maybe, despite its long history, may be new to the working in this way or engaging in research or projects that lead to research in this way. I think it's important to look at those categories, those labels, the terminology, because there can be a risk that these terms, collaboration, participation, co-production, co-design, are bandied around interchangeably as if synonymous with one another. Particularly in research, I think there could be some benefit in taking a moment to consider what the activity is you're doing, and therefore thinking about how you want to badge it, because they're not interchangeable. They, despite it, or be adjacent, or be in those sort of Matryoshka doll styles, popped into one another, but they are not the same. Clarifying some of these terms helps manage the expectation of everyone involved, but also help to align any directions of travel of the research that's going on. So collaboration is probably nearer the bottom of that ladder of Einstein's ladder of participation. It would just be that you've taken part, you're a participant, right? Collaboration, participation, for me, might be slightly disingenuous if they're being thrown about as they're, look, we're working together, everyone's got the same status, everything is shared in terms of a power dynamic here. Co-production for me is where the people who are often labeled as participants seem to have more agency, seem to have more say, and can sit alongside co-design. But co-design can sometimes obscure things like a group of, if you're working with research participants who are young people, it might have been one group of young people who design the format or the direction of that research. However, they may not be the young people who are continuing to be engaged in the pursuance and that research. So this idea that because there's collaboration and co-production, or even if there was co-design, there's a degree of equity. It's just something to I think stay aware of. Not that any of these are bad or good in a moral sense against one another, but it might be useful to continue to rethink these, to check in if you are engaging in this kind of activity, as I have done over the years and continue to do so. In that image there, that's me lying on the floor in the sort of reddish top. To check in with yourself as to what is taking place. Is it right now collaboration? Is it participation? They're both great in their place. Or is it something else? And if we are wanting to stick to that aspiration of trying to maximize the potential of the skills and experience and expertise of all of those people involved, all those agents involved, I think there might be for something I am beginning to term co-intentional research. Co-intention isn't a term I created. It comes from a fantastic and wonderful legacy of scholarship and philosophy that emerged for me, in my awareness, from the work of an amazing pedagogue based in Brazil, Paulo Freire, and this idea of co-intentionality. And what I like most about it, as I struggle to paraphrase the great Freire, is that it pays, for me, really close attention to the fact that there are power dynamics in a situation. And by paying close attention to those power dynamics, it renders them less important to the activity of the research the engagement, the combined work. And paraphrasing Freire, he coined the term thinking about education and thinking about this idea that teachers were tabulated in the position of having mastery, and anybody that they were teaching their students were, and huge apologies if this is a grandmother and egg sucking situation for many people in this Zoom, but anybody tabulated as students in that transaction, according to Freire, was saying that, and basically just need to sit mute and be filled with the wisdom of their teacher slash those with mastery. Freire obviously fundamentally disagreed with this, and his idea of co-intentionality is relational. It's about him saying, as teachers and students, and in that case, think and students, it would be easy to replace with researcher and expert by experience. In the case, a lot of those experts by experience are young people. I think that's quite apt, really, in a piece of research. Adolescent mental health. Well, surely, and well, we shouldn't we be asking people who are the world as our ability to it, as people who may be older than them, is different. So to come back to Freire, finally, this idea of co-intentionality being, if teachers and students, to paraphrase Freire, are co-intent on the same destination, they share an agreed idea of what it might look like, then the idea of mastery and being a teacher and student is fluid and flux between them. Despite that, I think it's so important. Again, it's probably challenged because of its sort of colonial framing, but an idea that used to sit in sort of some anthropological studies about the scales of communities. And when a community of humans was at a band stage, probably less than 15 or 20, leadership and power was completely linked, as I understand it, to the required task and the required of that task. If Paul and I were and we're outside in the wilderness, and Paul knows how to build a tent and find water, there is a fluidity around the deployment of that power so that it doesn't become a barrier. Despite it allows us to have real, respectful, active relationships with each other as researchers. In our work, if we are researchers, and in this case, young people we work with as co-researchers, to them, as an academic, locked in around research, publication, seminar exchange, public engagement, being an investigator or a co-researcher is really. Is it important to young people? Even if we've managed to achieve that status in some way, co-researchers, how can we also make sure that title matters to them? How can we also make sure that at the resolution of any research, there is an understanding of a shared benefit? And by this, I'm not saying, as was of old, that participants normally were beneficiaries, and that was what they might be getting from engagement. We've some distance away from that kind of activity. What I am saying is, if the academic ecology that I'm involved, a lecturer in applied theatre at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, and I write about it, or some knowledge exchange or practice research about it, I derive a lot from that. If I have collaboration with others, who may be young people in this case, what do they get out of it, other than those wonderful benefits that they've gained from being part of the project? And how, in this academic ecology, are those wonderful benefits that in other arenas are sometimes called like soft skills or transferable skills, how are they being valued? Because if they don't, the same currency citation in reputable publications or journals, then how sort of look at the economy that's been generated because of this interaction? Despite it, one of I guess, putting forward, asserting for this idea of what co-intentional research could be considered is that there's a mutuality of benefit, and that there isn't patrician view that it's really good for these young people to do it and they'll grow and they'll get resilience. All right, but if they're the mechanistic process for their engagement, there may be problems. Despite it isn't simply a case of accruing those co-researchers who are experts by experience, in this case young people, with some of the same status labels as some of the academic researchers. When we created were co-created publications and took them to journals to see if they were going to be they could share them, there was some journals, I'm not going to name them, but there was some journals about how could it be somebody who didn't have graduate training, terminal degrees and such, how could they actually be researchers? You know, they didn't even have an academic higher education affiliation. Despite it, an interesting point of view, if you are considering the fact that you are approaching this for the first time, what happens if we begin to think about this? So it could be, and was in lots of cases, easy to get these younger people university affiliation. Then they could be considered great, but that doesn't. It's target about the mutuality of benefit. And I think that's something that's worth thinking about, considering further. Despite of these co-researchers, young co-researchers in this case, is essential for the academic researchers. The research won't move forward without them. It won't have the rigor that it needs to be of value without these participants. And the participants sometimes know that, but sometimes don't. Despite it, they slide down that ladder of participation, and they, despite it, at worst, the subject of the research, the thing that's prodded and poked, and maybe less at best, but still not great, some beneficiaries. This will be really good for them, but they don't have very much say about it. And that alignment and that direction of travel also is a huge challenge when it comes to the efficiency of the research. If Project Create, we're trying to build resources and methodologies that are going to be materialized as something useful for young people, if the perceptions and initial methodological percepts of them come from academic researchers, how is there a way in for these young people who are supposed to be creating it, delivering it, and offering it to other young people as some set of resources for support? There are also simple mechanistic challenges of trying to do everything in a collaborative way, trying to make everything a shared series and process of decision making. Can be really difficult. Also, it can possibly paint an unrealistic picture of how or more conventional academic research is done. I've many a research project where I might be an investigator. That doesn't mean I get a say on every decision, and neither should I. So creating an environment that seems to infer that everything is consensual because it's collaborative or even co-intentional may not be beneficial or useful either. So what am I saying? I'm saying if we want this collaborative element, co-design, co-delivery, creation, to why is really important. And a cognizance of what it means also really important. Chris, you may talk about it later. My discipline is theatre and performance, but lots of in and out of sciences and social science are really wanting to, for all the best reasons, really wanting to lean into this of working with communities rather than on them or at them. But PPI, co-design, participatory research, and co-intentional research are not all the same. And So yeah, there's been co-design as we talked to some young people 3 months before we started the project, and then we set up, and there's no more involvement of young people. Doesn't seem to be have the integrity that it could. I think the idea that might collaborate together and share expertise in the highest degree of equity is wonderful. And it's one of the things that I strive for in all of my practice research work. But my tensions around what that really means. So it may be, as I've said, the process itself, the research as it was delivered and deployed, incredibly collaborative, participatory, and equitable. But then I might get some publications, and the participants might get some great things to put on their CV, but what else do they get? And importantly, the kinds of knowledges that are discovered, revealed, generated, working ethically in as collaborative a process as possible, require the same or similar kinds of valorization, in my opinion, to the knowledges that are acquired through more conventional and or translational methodologies. One of why there have been so many exciting discoveries and developments across Create is Tuesday, is because of the different perspectives, the interdisciplinary experiential perspectives that all of the agents in it bring. But if there's a similar acknowledgement of that, of the value of that knowledge, then start to get problematic. The worst kind of collaborative, interdisciplinary experience I've had in my career is when, as an aesthetic and performance theatre scholar, I was in the middle of a project that I've been brought in to use my expertise and experience to disseminate research outcomes of the research, not to be a researcher, to make it all almost literally all singing and all dancing. It's not useful. Huge apologies, folks, if you're commenting and responding to what I'm saying in terms of this provocation in the chat, because I'm not looking at it in the moment, because that split focus will make me lose my stream of thought. However, interdisciplinary has to value that all expertise in the room is expertise. It's not just practice, it's expertise. It is research, even if it's practice, deployment, dissemination, and valorization of the work. So in like 18 minutes, I've tried to solve all of this, and we've got it all sorted now, and we can leave this webinar fully cognizant that we know what to do and how to do it. No, but it might be that we can think about, well, if we're going to do this properly, what do we need? If we're going to lean into it and value it as an research modality, what's that other ecologies that sit around it as research? What are we going to do about that? A love of a discovery, a poem that I discovered because of Billy Bragg called Talking to the Taxman About Poetry, and that the tax collector had come to the village to get the taxes. And the poet went to the tax collector and said to them, here's a poem, and the poem is how I pay you my taxes, because that's how I produce work. I'm a poet. So if we're a taxman about poetry, about co-intentional research, co-design and co-delivery, that is also the currency through which we should or could make our payment. And I think I'm now completely spent. Thanks for listening.
Thanks very much, Sylvan. I always love a bit of Billy Bragg reference in that. I didn't know that. I mean, I know the album very well, but I didn't know that that's how the name came about. So thanks for that information. I wonder now if we could hand over to Chrissy. Is that okay, Chrissy? Because I know you had some thoughts, particularly on that notion of what people, what does co-production mean in terms of activities and what people get out of it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, thank you, Sylvan, so much for that. I mean, it's a pleasure to work with you, and I think I'm learning so much from you in terms of your approach to kind of these thinking about co-production, and just listening now, I was so intent. I think as a psychologist and someone that's quite new to co-production, I think my main comment really in response is around the term co-intention, and I've kind of been reflecting on that quite a lot. And I think most recently we conducted some qualitative thematic analysis with the young people online. So we delivered two-hour sessions of coding and thematic mapping. Now this experience felt very different from other things that we've done within this project. So the Living Labs comes to mind. And I think because of that, I did feel a sense of uneasiness, I suppose. And I think of that has a lot to do with how we put so much effort into there being an equitable space and this kind of non-hierarchical approach to this project. And I think this felt slightly unbalanced to me, given the experiences we've had, amazing experiences in Living Labs. And so I think it was because it felt more like we had the knowledge in a sense, because we are researchers and we did a lot of this data analysis, and we were sharing that knowledge with the young people. And I think with that came, I guess, an imbalance in power or knowledge, or however you want to look at it. And I think now, reflecting on that term co-intention, maybe rather than co-production, is an interesting one. And I think it really highlights that it is task dependent, and completely what you were saying around the fact that there is fluidity to it, I suppose. And in some cases, at different points, there'll be power at different levels and different places. And that's okay, as long as if there is clear communication around the intention and the purpose of what we're doing. So yeah, I think that's just really a comment, to be honest, just reflecting on what you've been saying. And yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, always learning.
Thanks very much, Chrissy. That's really, really helpful comment in response to Sylvan. We're now going to be moving on to what the YPAG think about all of this stuff. But we wanted to start off by presenting a film. So Danielle, do you want to say something about this film?
As part of sort of closing, we're coming to the end of the project, and as part of our sort of winding down of the YPAG, we wanted to give our young people the opportunity to reflect on their experience of being a part of the YPAG. And so we ran a 2-day workshop where they, either in small groups or independently, created short films as a means to reflect their time being part of Project Create and being part of the YPAG and what that sort of meant to them. And this is one of the short films that was created. The group was the largest group that came together. They were called the Sensational 6+7. But it's a very short film where this group used dance and film to reflect on their engagement as part of the YPAG. So I'll play it now. We've got 4 questions that we've put together for our YPAG to find out what their thoughts are around co-production. And so the first question that we've asked is, what does co-production look like to you? Frida, are you okay to jump in?
Co-production to me, it is very much about equity in the way Sylvan kind of put it, and through my experiences with the YPAG and the living labs, it is that I'm seen for who I am in that moment and in that space, and that my voice isn't only heard, but that it's vital to the project. And it's not just like a box that is ticked or an addition that is nice, but it's a thing that is at the core of what we're doing, which has been really, really special. And that's such an easy thing to say, that young people's voices are vital in what we do, but it's that is actively like acted upon, and that I can continuously like see the reality of my ideas and thoughts and inputs and needs and wants in the project, that I can actively see that being put into like the next step, or being a plan being worked around based on what someone needs in that moment. That is a key part of co-production to me, and both hearing and seeing directly how my voice and how me as a person impacts a project.
Brilliant. And Nanya, over to yourself.
Yeah, so kind of bouncing off what Frida said as well, co-production in the YPAG also kind of meant to me about having my own voice being heard in that equality sort of sense. And actually, initially, I didn't really understand what co-production meant. I'd never really thought about it or heard of it. But then reflecting on it, it's something that, like, especially from the short film, it's like working with other people and creating something, designing something, and that sense of teamwork and everyone's own like individual ideas and creating something together, kind of like not towards people or like for people, but like with people. So that teamwork aspect is kind of what stood out for what co-production looked like to me. So yeah.
Zria, over to yourself.
I think the biggest kind of like almost like a misconception of co-production is the fact that it's equal power of like the young people versus like adults and researchers, but it's more about like sharing the power, because it's not equal power, as in we're not doing the same level of stuff compared to researchers, but it gives the same kind of weighting almost of what we're doing. So it's like a balance of it. So we're almost like partnering, and it's more rather like it's co-production, but it's like partnering in on something where you're doing, it might not seem like the equal amount. It's very similar in that, in its separate form. So for example, for a young person, it might only be a 20 or 30-minute kind of meeting, but you don't see everything like the hidden side behind that. So it's like taking time out of school or taking time out of their like time after school, making sure that they've got their homework done beforehand for it, kind of thing. It might not seem equal, but the weighting of it evens out. And I think it's very much about like the care and trust you can have with each other, that you can be very honest, because you can have a YPAG or you have someone ask for your opinion, but make it very obvious that when you're saying something negatively, that they don't like it and they're not even going to take it on board. So it just becomes almost redundant to even speak about it. So yeah, I think co-production is, it's not a tick box exercise, but it can be, it's not the fact that if I'm doing this, then the young people must do something equivalent, more making sure that it's still in their range to be able to do so. And it has the same value, not the amount.
Yeah, phenomenal. All three of you, thank you so much for sharing that. The second question that we're looking at is, someone was saying and we've heard it, there's a lot of thought going into co-production and how do we do co-production properly. But with all that conversation going on, with all the effort that's put into it, does that matter to you? Does it matter about all that effort, all that work that's going into co-production, into these relationships? Like, where is the value? Where should we be focusing our value? The value around co-production or co-intention or whichever co is working for that environment or that project.
I think it's made a really big difference, especially from create the first couple of meetings, and kind of like the agenda was very much getting to know each other. And in like talking in other projects, when they're looking at how to kind of build a YPAG or something similar, it's always been kind of like the first thing that I bring up, saying that I was like, in Create, we did it like this, and it helped so much in the long run that yes, it was like 3 or 4 sessions at the start that was like, from a researcher's point of view, you probably didn't get much out of it. But from a young person's point of view, we got to know each other so well, and like everyone kind of gelled with each other and got to know each other enough that you were okay kind of like speaking out. It wasn't a worry of, oh, should I say this, should I not, kind of thing. So it's where you've been able to like make it was messy to begin with, but it helped smooth everything over in the long run.
So very much about laying the groundwork, building the relationships, and putting a lot of focus into that before kind of getting down to maybe the nitty gritty and the research.
Yeah,
I don't know
if
if
we feel kind of like rushed to start, or we've got to have like an output straight away.
So giving time to that's really, really important. Having time, which is the massive resource, I think, for a lot of people building those relationships. Frida and Anya, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think all the effort that went into the community building and making sure everyone who was in the room, researchers or people from the YPAG, we kind of in the room, I felt like we very much existed on the same level, and everyone made an effort to get to know people. We all participated in the same like half like games at the start, and like after lunch during the living labs, and that created such a space that was really, really important for me, at least, to feel that I could like be my full self, and to know that everyone who was in that room wanted the best for the project and the best for everyone else in that room. All the effort that went into building that community and maintaining it across the YPAG meetings as well really meant a lot. And I think that was like, yeah, the piece of effort that meant the most to me personally.
I want to ask you a question, Frida, specifically, because you first got into the YPAG through the one-day regional workshop that we had down at Central, which is still trying to encompass the same values, same relationship. Engaging with a project with a one-day workshop, what were the difference, like, again, considering about wanting to still have that equitable relationship, is there anything distinctive across the two, or did you find that the values were still employed, both whether you're in the long-term YPAG going for, a year or so, to just participating in a one-day workshop? Is there anything that stands out that is similar or different?
Yes, I feel like the base values were there, but they were kind of put into practice in different ways in the two workshops. As Shrey said, you could take more time in the YPAG and the living labs, so that felt like more like intentional community group trust building. But in the smaller workshops, that felt a bit more like managed in a way, because we didn't know each other that well. And it was a first introduction and first time thing. I still very much felt that my voice was heard and that it was for us, and in some manner by us, but it felt a bit more like a constructed workshop that had been made and then put into practice, whereas the living labs in the YPAG felt more like it was created by us.
And Anya, throw this one at you. What would you change? Anything over the course of your engagement from the very beginning, really, of the project? What would you change?
Okay. I think maybe. I mean, I loved how in the YPAG we all had like different things that we were working on, and we all kind of changed groups and things like that. So it was kind of, we got to interact with so many different people. But I think, I'm not sure, something I would change, maybe having something independent then, because a lot of the stuff that I worked on was always more collaborative, which kind of relates to that co-production aspect, but maybe something independent, and then after doing that independent work, coming together and seeing how that would come together as a group.
Yeah, amazing. Sweet or Frida, anything you'd like to add to that?
I think it's really hard to pick something of what we would change, because nothing was kind of like set in stone from the first living lab. Anything that we had like an issue with or we didn't quite like was like immediately kind of referred back and it changed. So I think if you had asked me from the first living lab, and when you did, I did say that like everyone brought a couple of things up, but like almost like we've perfected it kind of thing. But yeah, I think, and it's one thing that like for every project you want is just more time, because I feel like we did so much and we could have done so much more having more time to do so. But also in that way, where the way we've kind of like left the living labs, we've had like set amount of living labs and everyone was kind of like a building on from the last one kind of thing. It all was like planned really nicely, that it wasn't every time you come in you didn't know what was kind of going on, because you had a couple of YPAGs before, you'd have it like built up of you, so you had at least an idea of what you were doing, as in what the focus of the living lab would be. Not quite what you were doing exactly, the activities or anything like that, but you at least knew. And by having it as a weekend away, I think was really, really special, because it kind of puts you in that mindset. You're not kind of going home trying to sort out this or that or the other, and then coming back the next day almost like tired from what you've done after the living lab. So it was really nice to have that kind of like, it was almost a breakaway to just focus on this one thing, and then you work on that for the weekend and then go back into almost like normal life, which is really nice like that. It was, for a lot of us, especially like the older group, it was like a break from uni and everything else, because you made sure that weekend was free. You crammed like all your work before or after to make sure you had that weekend where it's like, I'm just gonna do this and like enjoy it.
Lovely. Frida, I'm going to come to you. What was the most important thing that you got from your time with Create?
It's a very good question. For me, there are a couple of things that are all the most important, so I'll say a couple of things. For one, it's learning how to be creative just for the sake of creativity. All of the living labs introduced new like creative skills that were really special, because I have been and am doing a degree in theatre, so I'm very used to being assessed on my creativity, and having skills like filmmaking and collaging and photography introduced to me in a way that I could do it just for myself. It was really, really special. And then the community and all the connections I've made have also been so special. And it's been, yeah, when we made the last like films, I thought a lot about like warm, cozy, fuzzy rooms, because that's how all the create rooms have felt to me. And then lastly, it's opened up the world of academia to me, like something that is way more accessible than it seemed before I first started the coding we got to do with Chrissy. Chrissy was really, really cool. And it's, yeah, partly at least, inspired me to do my MA, which I'm doing now, which is really cool. And yeah, it's given me so much, and it's been a really, really special time, and I've appreciated it so much.
And Nanya, would you like to add anything?
I think there's definitely loads of things I could probably say. I mean, especially because it's been quite a while since I've been attending the YPAG meetings. I think at the start, I felt like it was a lot more daunting, because it felt kind of like you were in a group where you knew that it was like a research aspect, but it wasn't as clear to me how this would kind of work as a group, how, these people who are like researchers and then we're just like young children. But then I think afterwards, after going to the meetings, the living labs and stuff, it felt more just like a community, and it didn't feel like we were sitting across these like people that were like assessing us or looking at what we were saying and things like that. It just felt like this open room, and we were just all talking together and like learning about different things. So definitely the most important thing was kind of like building that kind of community, and with so many different people that I wouldn't have expected before. I would be talking to like someone who's of like a totally different age group to me, but being able to make that bond as well with that person. So yeah.
Amazing. And Sri, I don't know, final word. What have you gotten out of the most important thing that you've gotten out of Create?
I think for me it was kind of like the opposite that a lot of people got of I like kind of learned to take a step back, especially in the last living lab, because I'm very much of a person who, like, once I have an idea, I'll go with it until it has like no steam kind of thing. But for the last living lab, when it came to the video, I couldn't think of what to do. So I normally I always have an I have I'm like I have an idea and I'm gonna see how it goes. But I had no idea. So I just kind of like joined another group and just like supported them until, and then at the end of the first day I had come up with an idea and I went around doing it the second day. But I'm very much a person who kind of like jumps 2 feet in and sees what happens. So I think for me it's been the idea of taking a step back and like supporting others rather than being the one who has the idea and getting help from others kind of thing. So yeah, I think that was like a big thing as like personal that has helped and has come from Create.
Oh, thank you all so much. I think one of the things that sort of summarize what a lot of you have been saying throughout these questions is the importance of a research project having a resource to support you in whatever achievements you might want to have, but also in supporting you to give and not give at times that work for you, rather than constantly asking something of you, finding ways subtly or in grand gestures that gives you something in return, whether it's a community, whether it's the opportunity to upskill yourself, or whether it's that permission for self-development to be able to reflect on how much you need to give at any given moment, despite whatever the requirements and the asks are around. Thank you all so much for that. I think we can probably now open it up to the wider group that are here for any questions that you might have of Sylvan or Chrissy or of our YPAG.
So please, let's open it up to questions.
I was just going to say, so I work for NHS Kent and Medway as a lived experience lead in a commissioning team, and something we found was that, excuse me, there's and I've just come off another webinar actually about the instability and inconsistency of use of co-production. And sometimes there's a bit of a fear around not saying co-production because it's seen as the only, I guess, the gold standard. And if you're doing anything less, then you're not doing anything well. So I developed a framework with some colleagues called the Lived Experience Engagement and Employment Framework, and I've been delivering some training around it from people that are sort of participation workers and do participation day to day, up to people, and I don't say up to, I always think of the system as linear, everybody has the same thing to give, but sort of commissioners and heads of service. And the amount of times they've said, oh, we write co-production in our key performance indicators or specifications for services. And they're like, but that's not the right thing. And a lot of people were saying, oh, I said I'd done co-production and I actually haven't. So we've been sort of creating a system knowledge of what actually is and creating a consensus around that. And it's actually been really helpful because I've been delivering it across lots of different sectors, even though it was developed sort of around children, young people and parent carers. It's very much applicable across the board. But I think even just having a base understanding of what co-production is can be really helpful. In that sense, I'm more than happy to share the framework. Like, I hope that you don't mind, create people, because this is your platform and you've got lots of resources. But as the lived experience lead, like it's really heartening to see that people are caring more about engagement and doing it right. And actually, a lot of the time people are doing collaboration, they're not doing co-production, but it's that whole thing of any sort of engagement is better than none. But it's just ensuring that it's not tokenistic, but writing within specifications, and whether you're doing a research project or commissioning a service, like it's doing engagement well and doing it right. So yeah, I know that's sort of a weird random thought around that, but it's it doesn't have to be called co-production for it to be good, I think.
Thanks, Tamsin, and please do share. I mean, this is, it's a platform for everybody. This is just about trying to kind of share all the good ideas. So if you send us anything you want us to do, we can also then kind of push it on our website, etc. Rebecca.
Hi there. Thank you for such a great series of shared insights and things. I was just wondering, so in my project, I wouldn't describe it as co-production because that wouldn't be, it wasn't possible within the remit, but I've always tried to take that kind of ethos as far as I can with what I would call it as, consultation, really. But one of the things I've really struggled with is knowing how to find out from PPIE partners what training they might like and how to. So within my funding, I have a small pot of money allocated for training. So I can, if PPIE people who are in the project want to do a particular bit of training to help skill them up for part of the work, or, something that they feel they would benefit from, then I can do that. But the thing I've got stuck with is kind of working out how to kind of find out. So, I've drafted various questionnaires. I've thought, I'll just speak to them one-on-one, etc., etc. But I'd love to know how the people go around that particular bit of it, because there was some what sounded like really useful guidance on the NIHR website, and that's disappeared, and they said it's been deleted, and I can't get it. So I don't know what other people are doing about that.
Can I open that up to colleagues if anybody's got any thoughts on that, or anybody in the room that is experienced, particularly with PPIE? Sylvan.
Thanks, Rebecca. Really interesting question. I think maybe one of the first distinguishing things is in terms of the skill set, or is it a discrete skill or an innate skill, shall I say? So part of that resource consideration that Danelle was talking about is the time that is invested in relationality. It may be that the skill that some participants need is the space to feel empowered enough to have their voice matter, as it were. I know that sounds like it needs to be a tagline for a Coca-Cola ad or something, but there might be something in that. Whereas at the other end of that scale, if I was collaborating with Christina on analysis, I need training in that analytical technique, and that be clear and crystal. But if I don't all about saying I don't know how to do that kind of analysis, I'm never going to be able to access that training. Sometimes in the work I do, I elucidate some of that need. So some of the ask is part of the facilitative process and maybe instigated while something else is going on, because that might be an opportunity where the richness of the conversation that's going on around a task allows someone to go, do you know what, actually I'd really love to work on that bit with Chrissy, but I don't know how to do it, rather than going, what do you need, because sometimes what you need, it's always the sort of bête noire of participatory work, going into a group of young people who have been disempowered and saying, what would you like to do? If they haven't had to lean into their power and go, I actually want to do, what you're going to get as an answer to is silence, if you know what I mean.
That's super useful, and I totally hear everything you've said there. I mean, my group are really good at talking and saying what they think they know and they don't know, and I think they do definitely have that empowerment bit, but I absolutely love the idea of supporting them to get to that point. I guess my question is really about if how have other people actually gone about having that conversation? Have they asked people, like as a team, or asked them one-to-one, or have they sent out email saying, these are some things that I could give you training on, these are other trainings that I've heard about, like which ones are you interested in? Like, it's more like, how have people actually done it, and then how have they made sure that they've allocated the resource fairly, so because everybody might say, oh, I want this, I want that, and you're like, oh my god, I've only got £3,000.
So I'm sure Danelle will be able to come in on that.
I think it's such a brilliant question, but then you threw me with the how do you then manage your research, how do you manage the money with that, and maybe it all kind of ties in. I think with any upskilling, and as Sylvan said, if you just say to people what do you want to do, you're often going to be met with silence. So whenever I've brought an invitation or an offer to the table, I've brought options A, B, C, and D, which will always be other. And then it's giving young people either a catalyst to start, or, to think about what it is they might want to do. So, for example, the project's kind of winding down now with this, with this being one of the last webinars, and the YPAG is going to be winding down, and we have these monthly online meetings that are going to be finishing in December. But what I've provided all of the young people is 3 options of how they might want to continue being a part of Project Create into next year, where they could be a part of 1, 2, or all 3 of them. And that's creating a film about what they think makes a good YPAG in relation to a lot of the papers and information out there that people have already made about what makes a good YPAG. So I think that might be a really interesting discourse. There's also the invitation for them to take over sole responsibility of their Not So Alone campaign, so teaching them the skills to run the podcast and the Instagram account. And then also there's an invitation to do a dissemination event next year, and whether they want to be part of the panel that works with me in delivering that event. And so they might want to do any of them, they might want to do none of them. I think sometimes just come to the table with a select few items and see what they say, and you're starting that conversation, and then you'll keep coming back to the table. I've got options A, B, and C. We've had options where we've said to young people, would you like to be involved in coding? The ones that have wanted to be involved in it have come on board. We've given them options where external researchers have said, look, I'd like to work with a YPAG, and do you have anyone that might be interested in this? So I put that invitation out there. I think it's whenever opportunities arise, you present them, and anybody that's interested will come on board. Exactly for asking young people to be involved in these webinars as speakers is always putting out that invitation, saying this is what it's about, this is the invitation, this is what you'll get for your participation in terms of financial remuneration. So that's the other thing as well, is where they're doing work for the project, is that we're paying them for that, because we're being paid to do it as well. So you're constantly going to be having that discussion, whatever is happening in the environment, whether it's one item that comes up or whether there's multiple, just present it to those that might be interested, and they might pick it up or they might drop it, and that's okay. I think that's absolutely okay. It's also respecting that they may or may not be interested. You might go at some point after, you know, constantly doing it and everyone's going, no, I'm really not interested, is maybe going, are you interested? Or am I just not bringing the right things to the table? But you could do that pre-questionnaire going, what would you be interested in? But I think sometimes we only really know when that information is presented to, when that information is presented to them. Sri, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Mine was more about not needing training, but working on multiple YPAGs. I've kind of like noticed a lot of the time you can have someone who has got like all the co-production training and like they've done so much co-production things, but if their attitude isn't one to listen to young people, they're not going to listen to young people. Because of the age. So it might be that, yes, they've got like, for example, they'll say that they've worked in teams before and in like they've done group work and everything like that. But if they're not going to respect a 16-year-old's voice and they're going to not listen to the 16-year-old, but then listen to the 22-year-old, it doesn't work. And we've worked on one YPAG where that was the case. It was a really, really exciting YPAG. There was so many people interested in it. And what happened was, because no one was being listened to, it ended up just dropping off. That majority of the people just stopped attending. And in the actual idea of it was amazing. But because the people who had been put in place wouldn't actually listen to the young people or take on board, they were counted almost as like a lesser participant. So yeah, making sure that, I think you don't necessarily need the training of what co-production is. If you've got the attitude that you're going to go in and you're going to listen to the 5-year-old and the 15-year-old the exact same way, that's more important than having the training to back it up, I think.
But I wonder, does anybody want to break cover and have a final comment or question? Matty, I know you've been active in the chat. Is there anything you'd like to mention?
Nothing like being put on the spot, Paul. No, I did put a question earlier, which, you know, well, first I thought it was such an amazing comment there from Sriya around, you know, all the skills, but not the pedagogy, which I think does happen so often. And sometimes, you know, actually maybe the intention is more important than the skill, actually. And, you know, maybe there's a bigger conversation to be had there. I had a question, Paul, around kind of coming back to Sylvan's point around co-intentionality. And I'm always interested about how we actually find and discover co-intentional, co-intentions and co-intentional spaces when we don't come into rooms necessarily as blank canvas, but maybe as a whole set of pre-existing intentions for why people want to participate in projects. And that's from the micro, you know, I'm here for the refreshments at the bus ticket, through to I want to change the world and overthrow the government. And I just wonder about, and it's a bit similar to what people were saying earlier around how do you do an audit of sorts in that first early process? And I'd love to hear about how that has worked in Create, where those intentions from everybody are clear, and how that maybe has worked or hasn't worked.
Can I be really weird and ask why it matters for why a young person's there? Because for you to get your research, does it really matter what the young person themselves is getting out of it? For them, it could be they're literally just they have a reason to be outside of the house, like they don't have to listen to their parents arguing. And that doesn't necessarily mean anything for your data. It might be that bus ticket or that meal for the young person, but for you, you're getting that information. So does it really matter why you're getting that young person there?
Sylvan, I'll come back to you, Matty, after the people have commented. Sylvan, do you want to come in?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it might be a paradigm question. A lot of the collaborative co-produced work I do is iterative and inductive. So if you start with an intention but not a destination, I feel part of the process of coming together as a research team is in horizon scanning and then starting to search intentions to then collectively make an audit about what we could be co-intent on. And sometimes that isn't about being vague, that's about coming together and saying, this is a research project which has been funded to look at adolescence and mental health and well-being. And we've thought, if this point of view, what do you think? And based on the work that to allow those thoughts to actually be espoused, then you start to build what the criterion is for the research, which is different from, I have a question that I need you to help answer. Tell me your answers. Do you see what I mean? So I think the co-intention was enmeshed in how something is actually being delivered, and facilitation of setting up the and the YPAGs within the living labs, trying to navigate a research methodology. Does that make sense? Am I making any sense?
I think so. Matty, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, no, I just thought that was a great provocation. Why you need to know why I'm there. You know, it was an amazing provocation, and I guess really from my perspective of why asking that is so certainly, you know, any kind of co-producer or co-researcher in that moment isn't potentially trying to find the kind of exploited or their initial honest intention, which might just be, I'm there for joy. I just want to be there because I want to, you know, participate in this, which I fully support. I guess the reason why I'm asking that is that sometimes if you're there as a young person or a co-researcher for that purpose, but then actually I'm going to go away and write my research paper and say you were there for a very different research purpose, that's highly unethical from the perspective of the researcher. And that's probably why I'm asking that question. And I think if I'm honest with you, Sri, there should be more space in evaluation of research projects for actually those things such as, yeah, I'm just here to get out, actually. It doesn't have to be some nice, fantastical research terminology. It's, no, I'm just here for this purpose of social recreation, and that's it.
Right, well, thank you very much, everybody, for another, I love these things. They're such brilliant conversations. We always have, you know, you never worry about not having enough to say. They're always kind of like, you know, there's always plenty of stuff to go on in the conversation. So thanks so much for taking part. Thank you to all our speakers. Thank you to all the participants in this. Thanks so much, guys. Thanks so much for making Create such a wonderful experience for all of us that have been part of it. And see you all again soon, I hope.